Welcome to CityCast Denver. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Today, we're going to hear from two sides of a heated debate over zoning in Lakewood. After Lakewood City Council made sweeping updates to the municipality's zoning code last year, a fight has emerged between those who want to keep the changes and allow for denser housing or repeal them and slow the change of neighborhoods. Karen Gorday, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Hi, how are you?
Great. So, the campaign that you're managing wants to repeal the Lakewood zoning code that went into effect last year. Why?
Well, last year, City Council did pass the zoning ordinance, and the citizens ran 4 referendums because City Council took that large zoning ordinance, which was about 400 pages, split it into 4. We ran the referendums because Lakewood was already meeting the state requirements of high density along the transit corridors. And the short answer is we felt Lakewood went too far because it allows high density in all existing neighborhoods. And there's just the belief in Lakewood from the people that Lakewood's already overcrowded. And why don't we slow down and have a conversation and come up with a more common sense approach? Most of the people on this side know growth is going to happen. We just want a different approach to that. So that's the very short reason of this very divisive topic.
Okay, so why do you think repealing these zoning laws, why would that be beneficial for Lakewood residents?
So prior to the vote, the first vote was in August, and then the fourth one was in October. Prior to that, I know multiple citizens spoke to City Council, asked City Council to slow down. Let's have a conversation. Now, the city did work on the comprehensive plan for 2 years. And then in March of 2025, they received the zoning from the Planning Commission. And by October, it was passed, ready to go into effect. When the citizens said, let's slow down, the City Council said, absolutely not. And there was a huge discussion on August 25th City Council meeting where hundreds came up to speak on both sides. And City Council was adamant, no, we're going to go full steam ahead. We want this done before the election because we don't know what City Council is going to look like. And so everybody that was saying, slow down, let's have some town halls, let's have some conversations, they said, no way, we're not doing it. The change with the comprehensive plan, the way the existing zoning that was in place prior to August, the zoning had to follow the comprehensive plan. With the new zoning on page 2, it says the comprehensive plan is an advisory document only, which means no one has to follow the comprehensive plan. And the planning director has all sorts of authority to issue waivers on just about everything in the code. And he has a long history of issuing waivers to developers. And so there's no guardrails. They're not going to have to follow the comprehensive plan if they don't want. And it's going to potentially destroy the character in all these unique neighborhoods that are out there in Lakewood.
And I do just want to clarify for folks, a comprehensive plan is sort of a guiding document that cities create for like the vision of the city for the next decade or so, which includes, everything from like it's about land use, like how things can be built, where they can be built.
100%.
But like you said, it's a guiding document. It's not necessarily like the rules. I don't know if that's the best way.
Well, traditionally, though, in Lakewood, it has been the rules, and then the zoning goes a little more in detail. But with this new zoning, it says on page 2, well, now the comprehensive plan is an advisory document. So it's not a set of rules. They can use it for advice, but they don't necessarily have to follow it. And that concerns a lot of residents. For some residents, that was part of the reason they signed the referendum to try to get this to the ballot. And I want to say that most people that signed the referendum all had a different reason for signing the referendum, right? So it's not just against the zoning. It could be just one little part of the zoning they're against, and that's why they signed. But for some, it was the fact that the comprehensive plan does not need to be followed. They can just use it as an advisory document.
You also mentioned the character of Lakewood or the character of neighborhoods. And I think this is such a personal idea, like how you feel about character or what that. Can you just explain what you mean when you say like preserving the character of Lakewood?
So I don't even think it's not necessarily just me. And so I've learned a whole lot about Lakewood through this whole process, and I've met people from different parts of the city that I never would have met otherwise. And so Lakewood is unique in that, like up north in wards 1 and 2. So the wards that touch, that are closer to Wheat Ridge and Edgewater, um, and north of Alameda, for example, just to give your listeners
Yeah, that's
boundaries.
helpful.
Those wards 1 and 2 have a lot of large lots. And I used to think that down in Ward 5, because I'm on the southernmost part of Lakewood, my lot is 10,000 square feet or just over 10,000 square feet. And I was like, oh, this is a large lot. But it's not in comparison to some of the large lots up north. And some of those lots are an acre or over, with smaller houses on them. And um, it's really interesting because up there the character is different than the cookie cutter homes that were built 1978 and all the way up to now. So
Hmm.
my house looks a little different than Green Mountain and Solterra, but it looks a lot different than wards 1 and 2. Um, and so that's why I say cookie cutter, because cookie cutter in the 70s is different than cookie cutter in the 2000s, right?
Sure.
But in like wards 1 and 2, those cottages are like 15 feet tall. And if the lot next to them, if they keep their house, the lot next to them gets sold and it gets subdivided into smaller lots, then they could have a 35-foot tall structure next to their 15-foot house. And I think that needs to be understood, because the argument on the other side is, well, the height restriction didn't change from the old code to the new code. And that is true. It
Mm.
did not. But when you have most of the houses that are 15 to 25 feet, and if you get smaller lots, the only way to get square footage is to build up. So you could have a new, skinny, tall house compared to your 15-foot or 25-foot house to get the square feet.
Okay, that's a helpful description. So on your campaign site, one of the reasons listed to vote yes is, quote, for the horses. What does a yes vote mean for the horses?
So, yes. So the equestrian community has a lot of those large lots. So there are a lot of horse properties in wards 1 and 2. But the funny thing is, there's also horse property in wards 3 and 5. And there may be a few in wards 4, but I don't want anybody getting upset that I didn't recognize that. But think about if you have a horse and you got like an acre property, you want that open space with a little bit of field for the horse, etc. You don't want a 35-foot tall building 5 feet from the property line when you have a horse. It's gonna, a 35-foot building could block the sunlight, change the landscape, etc. And then the horse, for lack of a better description, starts to feel closed in, right? And if you get that on both sides or three sides of a piece of property, it changes the look and feel of your property.
So you're saying that because that's what something that makes Lakewood unique is that you can have it's zoned to have horses. I
Yes.
think that's something that maybe folks don't know if you're not familiar with the areas. My brother lives in Lakewood, and it's a lot of farmhouses. I think you've been describing smaller, turn of the century, early 20th century buildings on larger lots. And then my brother lives on a block that has he's part of, I don't know, 10 duplexes that run along that same section. But the way that Lakewood is zoned, people can have horses. So you're saying the way that the zoning changed, you think could encroach on it doesn't stop people from having horses. It just, you're saying that it could change how the lots around someone who has a horse?
That is correct.
Okay.
And I've talked to some of the equestrian property folks, right? And trying to understand their concerns. Because when you're running a campaign, you want to get all the voices. Um, and I will tell you, when I first moved to Lakewood, I didn't realize people had horses. That was something I had to get used to, because I'm in a older subdivision. There's no HOA, but I was just like absolutely blown away when horses were walking down the street, and I'm like,
Sure.
where do these horses come from? I didn't realize there were horses that close. And you have to understand, when I moved out to Colorado, I did live in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., but my last house in the D.C. area was in a rural part. So I don't have anything against horses. But when I moved to Lakewood, I didn't realize that there were so many horse properties, and I have one 3/4 of a mile away from me. Um, I was like, okay, this is kind of cool.
Sure.
But I was like, how are my dogs going to react? And my dogs don't care. But I have seen some dogs that don't like horses, right? So,
Sure.
but it's something that makes Lakewood unique.
Yeah, it has me thinking about O'Kane Park, which is a former dairy farm that is now a public park. But there's a structure. The family's house is still in the park, and that's part of that leftover residual farmland that was the beginnings of Lakewood. So just interesting historical context. So I have one final question. I'm going to ask both sides this question. The thing in Lakewood that Denverites seem to care a lot about is Casa Bonita and what is best for it. And why would repealing the zoning code be best for Casa Bonita?
I don't know. That's a good question. And I have to look at the zoning map, but I mean, it's good. I think that use over there, I don't think changes with the new zoning. And I think Casa Bonita will continue, whether the new zoning or the old zoning is in place, will continue to attract people from Denver. Casa Bonita is not going anywhere.
Well, Karen, thank you so much. This was really informative. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. You got it. Thank you so much for having me.
This episode is brought to you by MultiPass. Did you know you can sell event tickets and memberships for your organization, business, or creative endeavor with MultiPass? And you can buy tickets to your favorite events, meet new friends, and create community on MultiPass too. Proudly based in Denver and deeply rooted in the local event and creative scene, this platform is for event hosts and event goers alike. With MultiPass, you can build vibrant communities through its unique community chat feature that unlocks post-RSVP. And this helps attendees connect and engage with each other. The platform also solves cash flow issues with same-day payouts and offers revenue sharing tools that automatically splits ticket revenue between producers, performers, and promoters. It also features a promoter dashboard to boost attendance with built-in tools like the ability to add street teams and track performance. MultiPass, designed to help everyone in the event ecosystem win, not just the platform. Learn more at multipass.com. That's multipass.com. Lakewood City Council member Roger Lowe, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Thanks for having me, Bree. Thanks for having me on.
So you want to keep the new Lakewood zoning code that you helped push into effect last year. Why do you want to keep it?
Well, Bree, because it's a really great code. And we worked for 2 years with thousands of people in Lakewood to pass it. And because it makes Lakewood more affordable, and it creates more housing options for people in between large apartment buildings and big, spread out homes with front yards. And listen, I love homes with front yards. We got a lot of them in Lakewood. I love them. We're all for those. We're not trying to do anything to those. But we want to make sure that folks have options in between those two, what we call missing middle housing. So that's a really short answer.
Yeah, can you give us an example of missing middle? Because this is a term we use a lot, and I think sometimes it's hard to picture what that actually means.
Yeah, it's a great question, Bree. A duplex or a triplex, right? Someone, my constituent in Ward 3, Shane, works in IT. He's a little worried about losing his job with everything going on in IT. He'd really like to turn his house into a duplex. And he can't right now because in many parts of Lakewood, the zoning doesn't allow for that. A granny flat, right? Like building a small unit over your garage. A really small starter home, right, on a smaller plot of land is another example. One of the things Lakewood does right now, and a lot of cities do, and in my opinion, it doesn't make a lot of sense, is we say if you want to live in this community in a lot of different parts of in a lot of residential areas, you have to buy an acre of land, or you have to buy half an acre, or you have to buy a quarter of an acre. Now, I love wide open spaces, but if we're serious about making housing more affordable for teachers and seniors looking to downsize and frontline workers, given that the cost of land is a huge driver of cost, why would we force that, right? Like, why not let people buy a smaller home? Or heck, there's this configuration called cottage core configurations where you can have a couple small homes, right, on a larger plot of land. Let's allow that too. All of this will allow more so-called missing middle housing and more affordability.
So that's the current zoning code that was pushed into effect last year. What you're speaking about is these things are now, folks are able to do those things, right? To build duplexes in places that maybe they couldn't before. Or is that correct?
Well, the entire thing is on hold until we get to the special election.
Okay.
So it was supposed to go into effect in January, but the new zoning ordinance is on hold at this point, given the referendum, and maybe we can talk about that next. Yeah. Can say more on that, but
Yeah, please do. Tell us more, because that, I think that these details are really important, that the changes that were made, this big 400-page document that was passed after several years, you said, of planning and such, was put into law, but then now is on hold. It can't be put into effect because of this special election that was called to,
right.
Because some folks want to the other side of this argument wants to repeal those.
That's right. Let me speak to that. But let me maybe say just one other thing about the code.
Sure.
Sometimes I also like to really lead with all these things this new code we passed doesn't do, which is important to tell people. Here are things it doesn't do. It doesn't change the height limit, which remains 35 feet. That was the case before. It's the case now in residential areas. It doesn't change the setback requirements, the front or the rear, which are 25 feet in front, 15 feet in back. Those remain in place. It doesn't change what's called the open space requirement, right? If you live in most residential Lakewood communities, fun fact, 50% of your residential plot of land has to be open space or green space. Can't be asphalt, can't be built. We didn't change that. Still 50%. There's a whole bunch of design standards that are designed to protect the so-called character of the neighborhoods. We actually didn't change the design standards. We agreed that like Lakewood neighborhoods should look pretty, and we like those design standards. And we sure as heck didn't allow someone to build a large apartment building in a residential area, even though some folks on the other side of this are claiming that. It's just totally untrue. In fact, the code puts in place new safeguards that say that going forward, you actually can't build a massive, oversized, completely out of dimension, 6,000 square foot or 10,000 square foot monstrosity. We actually capped the total build, so you can still build a very large house, but not like a massive house with 20 bedrooms that you rent out. But we did allow people with all those safeguards in place to turn their homes into duplexes and triplexes. So to your question, under our charter, 3% of registered voters, which really is not in the scheme of things a very large number, can sign a petition within 45 days of an ordinance being passed by our city council. And if they do that and they present to the city clerk and it's determined to be valid, then that basically city council either has to repeal the ordinance, or we have a citywide special election for people to weigh in on whether they want to keep the ordinance. It's a little confusing, admittedly, because people will get a ballot, and yes means they want to repeal our new code. So yes means they want to go back to the old code that didn't have any of these affordability provisions and some of the other good stuff we put in. And a no vote, which is what I'm hoping folks will go for, means no, I don't want to repeal this new code. We actually want a more affordable, sustainable, walkable neighborhood.
So I talked to Karen Gourdet, who's on the other side of this conversation. And an example that she gave of concern is, say someone has an acre of land because they have a horse, and the acre of land they can still have. But she said with these changes, what it could mean is that someone could build again, the 35-foot structure that you mentioned, someone could build a 35-foot structure on all sides, like all the neighboring properties. And her concern was like, this code allows for that. And then things like it would be, blocking the sun or, like changing the character of the neighborhood. Do you think that that is something that could happen with the code changes?
I'm so glad you asked me that, Bree. And I respect Karen and I respect the work that she's doing. I genuinely do. And I've heard her say this many times. And that is a great example of the misinformation going around. So she's right that someone could build a 35-foot structure on their neighboring property. But guess what? They could do that before. They could do that for the last 10 years. Because remember, I just said the height limit has been 35 feet in Lakewood for the last 10 years. And guess what? Very few people actually build up homes in these more residential neighborhoods to 35 feet, even though they've been allowed to do that for the last 10 years. So it's kind of a good example of, in my opinion, some of the scaremongering, frankly, that's been going around. Yeah, technically someone can build a 35-foot, building anywhere in Lakewood right now. That's been the case for the last 15 years. But guess what? There's not really a market for the most part for doing, these higher density homes in more sort of in relatively low density parts of the city. What is true is that, so if you have a big acre of land and you have a horse, one of the things that we've heard from folks is that some folks are saying this code is anti-horse, which is, again, another example. It's just not true. If you have a nice big acre of land and you have a horse, you can continue to have that horse and you can pass it down to your kids. Your neighbors can too, right? And that will continue to be the case. What we've seen in other cities that have done this is change happens very, very gradually and incrementally. But what we do also want, we're trying to balance, like, we love horses, we love, large plots of land, but let's also allow someone, if they want to come in and buy less than an acre, right? And build a smaller starter home. It's about balancing those two needs.
So I think about Lakewood, and I honestly think about the diversity of housing that you do have. I go to Belmar all the time. I have friends whose parents have actually retired and moved into a condo in Belmar. I mentioned this, like, my brother is a postman who lives in a duplex next to like a field. There's farmhouses. There's houses there's subdivisions from the 70s. It's a good mix. What do you say to someone who says, well, Lakewood already has a lot of options. We're full. We got to slow density. Like, we got to slow down. What do you say to that argument?
It's like such a good question, Bree, and I so appreciate it, because this is absolutely the discussion. Look, I've heard that too. Look, people are afraid of change. I mean, that's just a basic fact. I mean, people that have been living in their neighborhoods, you'd say anything might change, and people get nervous, and that's part of what's undergirding this conversation. But here's the thing. I've also heard from a lot of my neighbors that they don't like this idea of, well, either it's going to be just big, wide open homes or large apartment buildings. A lot of people get grumpy when a large, 10, 15-story apartment building gets built, right? Like, we've actually seen that in Lakewood. Everyone wants their elected officials to champion job growth, right? No one is like, oh, let's kill jobs, right? Well, here's a funny thing about people when you create jobs. People that fill jobs tend to want to sleep somewhere. They tend to need housing. That housing can come, that's just math. So they can either be, they can either live really, really, really far away, right? Like, they can live 40, 50 minutes away, and they can be driving on our highways and polluting our air and clogging up our roads, which has kind of been the way, a lot of suburbs have done business. And it's too much the trend in the metro area. Or we can make more housing right here in Lakewood. Where is that housing going to go? You kind of have two options, right? You can build tall apartment buildings, or you can do gentle infill density. If you hate big, tall apartment buildings, and to be honest, I don't actually particularly in well planned and in the right place and well crafted, but I know some of my neighbors do. The best thing you could do is support a code that sort of allows gentle, gradual, incremental sort of infill density citywide, right? The thing about allowing it to happen citywide is you don't channel the growth through just a couple of sort of higher density neighborhoods that then tend to trigger backlash. It's also, frankly, unfair. I would love folks to ask, someone to ask folks on the other side, like, well, where do you want to put the housing, right? Because I think if you push hard enough, they'll often say, well, let's just keep building it like on a couple blocks on Colfax. Well, that's not fair. I mean, we can't say all growth has to come just, along a couple blocks on Colfax. That doesn't make any sense. Lakewood's a city of 150,000 people. It's the fifth largest city in Colorado. And, if we want to continue to sort of grow strategically and grow our economy, and we should, people have to live somewhere, and the housing has to be affordable. And the best way to do that, the fairest, most equitable way to do that, is in a thoughtful way that's citywide, that allows things like duplexes, cottagecore configurations, townhomes, accessory dwelling units.
So you brought up Colfax. My final question is something I'm asking both sides of this debate, which is the thing in Lakewood that Denverites seem to care about the most is Casa Bonita, and we want the best for it. Why would keeping the new zoning code be best for Casa Bonita?
Oh, well, that's okay. I can roll with that, absolutely. Well, it sure as heck would be great for all the folks that work at Casa Bonita, some of whom make lower wage jobs and make lower wages. Do you want them driving from Lone Tree and Aurora and communities way out in the suburbs and clogging up our roads every day as they come to Casa Bonita? Or do you want them to have, starter homes, duplexes, granny flats that they can, and home ownership opportunities, right? A lot of the folks that's a great example, Bree. These frontline workers at Casa Bonita. Why haven't I thought of that? They need duplexes too, right? I want them to be able to buy a place in Lakewood. And if you look at the cost of housing, they sure as heck aren't going to be able to afford to do that in basically any, traditional, totally, unattached home with a large yard, right? We've got it. So do you want your Casa Bonita workers working in a 12-story apartment building or living in a 12-story apartment building? A lot of my constituents say no. So in that case, let's change the zoning code. And by the way, it's going to make Lakewood more sustainable too, right? Less driving, more walkable. These smaller, more gentle infill density units use less water, which is going to allow more water to go to Casa Bonita. So,
which we need for the cliff divers, and that's
which we need for the cliff diver.
Well, Roger, thank you so much. This was really informative. I appreciate you joining us today.
I appreciate you covering this important story, Bree, and I hope your listeners will think about sort of the housing, the cost of housing that's on the line. And given how much work has gone into the zoning code, I hope they'll vote no on rollback, no on repeal. Let's keep these new reforms in place that make Lakewood more livable, more sustainable, more walkable. And thanks for having me on.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why don't you take a minute to tell Casa Bonita owners Matt and Trey that we'd really like to hear their position. Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and subscribe to our morning newsletter at denver.citycast.fm. And hey, thanks to our new neighbor MJW, who just joined our membership program. You could support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Denver neighbor today at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye-bye. See you later. I just hit the mic with my glasses.